Wow, I am so excited. I am not Bob Brown. And this is not my book, but it is a republished book. It's a published book in paperback, and there are postcards to collect at the information area. It's been republished with the help of the Bob Brown Foundation, and it's really well worth a read. It's called Tarkine Trails, so I'd urge you to get a hold of that. Available online or in all good bookshops, as they say. Do you know what? I was listening to the crowdfunding thing today and listening to how the links with the new and the old went together, and I'm really tempted to take a selfie. So I'm going to, because I couldn't get you all in. So how about you wave for this one, and I'll publish it. Thank you very much. Let's have a bit of fun. Yeah, I am really excited because I get to introduce a politician who I think has got an ex-politician who I think he's got integrity running through his veins. I don't know many politicians that I can think of that have got that, and he's amazing. So isn't that great? That gets a lot of applause already, Bob. So we're on to a good one today. And to think of the number of people that have turned out to see you, not me, today is also awesome. There's loads of people sitting outside. Fantastic. So Bob Brown was born and educated in rural New South Wales, and he worked as a doctor in Australia and the UK before moving to Tasmania in 1972 to search for the legendary thylacine. He helped to establish the Wilderness Society and was soon the face of the campaign that saved the Franklin River in 1983. We've got Terania Creek, you've got the Franklin River. He has been a successful high-profile environmental activist since that time. He was elected to the Tasmanian State Parliament in 1982, and during his 10-year tenure, most notably achieved gun law reform, gay law reform, and the expansion of the Tasmanian World Heritage Area. And there's more. In 1996, Bob was elected to the Senate, where he led the national debate for 16 years on issues including climate change, water, preventative healthcare, conservation, and human rights. Bob resigned from the Senate in June 2012 to establish the Bob Brown Foundation, a not-for-profit organisation dedicated to supporting environmental campaigns and green causes in Australia and our region. He is a published author and acclaimed photographer. It gives me enormous pleasure today to welcome, please put your hands together, for Bob Brown.
Well, thank you, Charlie. Thank you, Roy, for the welcome. Good to be here with you, Tamara, and my friend Dawn Walker, with whom we had lunch as we entered territory. Yes, Paul, partner Paul's with me. And particularly last night, we had the great hospitality of Tony and Rowena Parks. And thank you, Tony, for your youthful inspiration, which is just wonderful to see. I want to talk today about, on the line of don't get depressed, get active. It's a pretty simple dictum, but as I have said on many occasions, I take my leaf from the philosopher of the last century who said, Bertrand Russell, who said that the trouble with the world is that the stupid are cocksure. Now, he wasn't referring to current Australian politics because this is 70 years ago. The trouble with the world is that the stupid are cocksure, but the intelligent are full of self-doubt. And my answer to that is, well, get over it. But we are in a world in which whoever designed life on this little planet had a ladder of power in human affairs, those of Homo sapiens, in which the stupid and cocksure more readily climbed that ladder and with no trouble at all trod on the fingers and heads of the sensitive, intelligent, more caring people who drop off as a result. Now, I don't know which category I come into, but what I do know is that I did have 30 years in politics, and it was a very privileged time, both in state parliament and federal parliament, but I never became minister for anything, not even minister for westerly winds, because I had this bonding with our planet, which I couldn't set aside. And that's why it's such a terrific pleasure to be here today with some thousands of people who are committed to restoration rather than destruction. And as I've been saying to our friends from the ABC just outside, we did see a catastrophic destruction of life on the planet 65 million years ago when that great asteroid hit the Yucatan Peninsula, or just off near Mexico, and set up months of effectively a nuclear winter. And the great dinosaurs who'd been in control of the planet, they had two brains, some of them. We've just got one, but they went to extinction. And what we know now is that never since then has there been a reversal in the order of growth of diversity in life on the planet until the last 200 years or so. And we're now in a period again of freefall destruction of the ecosystem of this planet upon which we all depend. And it's accelerating. I was asked to write a foreword for a book on Australia's birds coming out next year, this week, and read through it about the appalling statistics on what's happening to Australia's bird life. In short, a third extinct by the end of this century. And I thought about the fact that Australia has the worst mammal extinction record of any modern country on the planet, but there's more than 20 more online for early extinction if we don't do something about it. And down at our house on the southern coast of Tasmania near Cygnet, the swift parrots have just arrived from the mainland. They range from here right across to Adelaide, or they did, in their flocks of thousands. They're one of only two migratory parrots on the planet. The other's the orange-bellied parrot, which also migrates between the mainland, but further south, and southern Tasmania. And the swifties, which are the fastest parrots on the planet, and some of you may have heard me say, they cross Bass Strait, takes the ferry all night, they cross in 3 hours. What's more, they do it talking all the way. They can never stop yabbering. And you know, as soon as you open the door in the morning, there they are. And they're budgerigar size, they're iridescent green, they're red underneath with blue tips on their wings, and they fly. I think they're faster than peregrine falcons. Peregrine falcons are supposed to be the fastest birds on Earth, and no doubt in a dive, they're the fastest creatures on the planet. But I think, you know, if on Cup Day they let out a swift parrot and a peregrine and said, go around this twice, the swift parrot would be first across the line and would still be talking. However, there's been young blokes down from Canberra this week, you may have seen it on 7:30 report, who've been cutting notches into the younger trees growing on Bruny Island simply because they haven't got to the age where they're dropping enough branches to have nesting sites for these birds to get in and nest in. And what's more, in 1837, a couple of young chaps caught the steamer across from the very new town, 2 years old, of Melbourne to Tasmania, and in their pocket they had a couple of sugar gliders, these beautiful little creatures with that mottling on their face, and they got sick of them and let them go. And those sugar gliders have now spread right across Tasmania, and they get into the nesting sites of the swift parrot and eat not only their eggs, but they eat mum as well. They haven't got to Bruny Island on the southeast, and that's the safest place for the swift parrots to persist. Problem: the current state government, the Liberal state government of Will Hodgman, has decided just this week that it will release 400,000 hectares of Tasmanian reserved forest for logging. And they've done this in the wake of having put 35 million of your money via the federal government into getting loggers out of that destruction of Tasmania's ancient forests just 2 or 3 years ago. They've taken $7 million that was meant to protect the area of forests which out of that agreement a few years ago were protected and be managed, and they've put it into getting loggers back into the forests. So some of those who are paid to get out are now being paid to get back in. So they need more wood. For what? Well, largely for wood chips to be sent to Japan, and largely there to create green electricity out of the forest homes of a great range of rare and endangered species, which are effectively being burnt in power stations, but also to make paper. And a villainous company, I'm very aware of the defamation laws, ladies and gentlemen, a villainous company called Tar An, which comes from Sarawak in Malaysia, where it has relationships with the former Chief Minister, he who said of rainforests, he was educated at Adelaide University, I might add, Taib, who said, the Chief Minister of the state of Sarawak of Malaysia, said rainforest, when tackled by a journalist about the rapid destruction of rainforest in Sarawak, rainforest, the sooner it's gone, the better. The rain interferes with my golf. Truly. And Tar An came to Tasmania gifted by $22 million from the then Lennon Labor government. This is a billionaire company which had been marauding the forest, one of 5 in Sarawak, and set up. And now there's some doubt that they'll be able to get enough timber out of current forest, although we're assured there is enough there, so they'll need more. And of course, on it goes. Now, what do we do about this? There is the option of course, thinking, oh, it's all too hard, let's do nothing. That's the depression option I mentioned earlier. There is the other option of being active. And in my long life, not quite, I haven't caught up to Tony yet, but I'm working on it. It's been the experience that it is far better to be active than it is to be depressed. I tried the second option for a decade or so when I was young, didn't like it very much, and realised that I only had myself to blame if I stayed there. So the action option comes along, and here I am speaking at a Juravin, if I've got you right, Roy, a centre of increase. We're talking about nature there. Here I am, delighted to be talking about a place where action is being taken to restore and to do what Edward St John, the great Liberal MP from North Sydney, said many years ago about Lake Pedder, which is our children will live to undo the destruction that we have wrought. And whatever motivated that destruction way back, times have changed and we need no longer to continue it. And isn't it wonderful that here, and I do think, if there is another festival on the planet and another movement more successful in restoring rainforest, I don't know about it. I think this is the centre on earth for restoration of rainforest. And I congratulate you, all of you who've been working for decades on doing that. And having a walk in Tony and Rowena's forest with Paul this morning, under the canopy with the birds, the spring bird chorus was simply a wonderful experience to know that that was just some decades ago a paddock. And it shows that we can be restoring it. And of course, it isn't confined to here or Australia. Everywhere I go, I find people who are wanting to change their lawn into native species. And I just recently saw the film out of America, funded by the wonderful ethical outdoors company Patagonia, on the restoration of river systems in the United States. Did you know that 1,000 dams have been removed out of American rivers in the last 2 decades, most of them small? And for example, on the Penobscot River in Maine, the locals got together and raised $24 million to buy the river. Apparently everything is for sale in America. And they bought it and they removed 3 weirs. And they're restoring that river for the fish, for the beavers, for the birds. What a wonderful thing is going on there as this collective brain of humanity says, wrong way, go back, let's stop the destruction first up, and secondly, then let's restore the planet. But the second can't wait for the first, and thank goodness you're not waiting. And you know, on a little river just near Seattle, which had 2 dams, 70 feet and 120 feet high, I think, concrete dams built in the 20s for hydroelectric production. They've now been dynamited out of the way. They had other means of removing the concrete as well. And that river has been restored so that the salmon run, which was down to less than 3% of its historic natural numbers, could be restored. And the Indigenous people are delighted now that the salmon are back, and with that, so are the bears, and with that is so much more of the restoration of that ecosystem. But everybody who goes to Seattle now wants to go and see the restored Elwha River. And on top of that is going to come, of course, the restoration of that one of the most beautiful little spots for the human imagination anywhere on the planet, which is Lake Pedder in Tasmania. It was flooded, a national park, in 1954. It was drowned by the Hydroelectric Commission with vilification of the greenies. Eric Rees, the Premier of those days, said, Electric Eric they called him, he was going to turn the Tamar Valley, which these days is, the vineyard trail par excellence if you come to Tassie, centred on Launceston, into the Ruhr Valley of the south, the industrial steel-making centre of the south. And part of that was flooding. He also said that mainlanders, that's you, are people who come to Tasmania with 1 shirt and 1 £5 note and go home having changed neither. Well, these days we welcome tourists to Tasmania, and one of the great tourism attractions to Tasmania is going to be the restored Lake Pedder. And I'll tell you why it's going to be restored, because it provides 26 megawatts of electricity, but if you want to take the worst, the hydro take on it, it's about 60 megawatts of electricity. Now, the average big power station these days creates 1,000 or 2,000 megawatts of electricity. Your Lawn B, for example, or I forget those things down in near Muswellbrook, yes. Bayswater, yeah, Bayswater. So it's a tittle. And a modern baseload solar power station, as they've already got built in Spain, and did you know that they've just opened one in California which is producing power at less than coal in the United States without government subsidies? The way of things to come. But a power station producing as much power as that which comes out of the suffocation of Lake Pedder is now possible. Build it in Victoria, and I think a public subscription to build such a solar power station or an alternative renewable setup will come very shortly. And that prediction of Edward St John, who got into lots of trouble for breaking ranks, I don't think he became Minister of anything either, back in the 60s and 70s, that we will live, our children will undo what we so foolishly have done, will come to be in Tasmania. Now, I, earlier this year, went up to see the farming folk of Laponia in northwest Tasmania. It's an outlier, if you like, of the Tarkine wilderness, which is part of the largest, which contains the largest temperate rainforest in Australia. And it's under great threat from mining, from logging, and the Aboriginal precinct down the west coast with hut sites and seal hide sites and just a congregated wealth of living Indigenous spirit being wrecked by four-wheel off-road vehicles driving straight through these sites. There's a temporary halt there because the Aboriginal Centre in Tasmania took legal action against the state government opening, legalising this destruction of the natural and human heritage of the west coast of the Tarkine, and the Aboriginal people won. And the judge said you can't do that under your own laws. Well, guess what? The State Minister for the Environment and the Federal Minister for the Environment, our most recent one, he who folk in the Arabian Peninsula dubbed the world's greatest minister, Greg Hunt, appealed. The Environment Ministers appealed against the Aboriginals' win in the court to get it overturned to allow the destruction to continue. And the appeal court effectively upheld Justice Mortimer's finding in the lower court, but we now believe it's very likely that the state and federal ministers will now authorise, in the wake of that, a go-ahead for off-road vehicles to be ripping up and down that coast anyway. And my foundation, the Bob Brown Foundation, which I do hasten to add isn't a superannuation fund, and I'm terribly embarrassed about the name, but there it is. After I'm gone, it won't matter too much, are working to protect Tarkine. And the great pleasure about this environmental campaign for the greatest temperate rainforest in the country and those beach precincts and so much more in the Tarkine is that we're doing it arm in arm with the original owners and custodians, the Aboriginal people of Tasmania. And this is a wonderful working relationship that we have. And our aim is not only to have this national park and World Heritage west of Cradle Mountain to the coast created, but in the process of doing that, returning it to the Palawa people of Tasmania. It's just 7% of Tasmania. It's not going to intrude on anybody's private property so that they can have on mainland Tasmania a place for their own cultural being and restoration. And what a good thing that will be for all of us. Well, I went up to Laponia, where the local little farming group, it's not even a town, had decided that Forestry Tasmania was coming to log its last 49 hectares of forest. And they said, no, you can't do that. It's full of rare and critically endangered species, including the Tasmanian devil, the spot-tailed quoll. And I visited the world expert on this in Lismore with Paul yesterday. He's up here for family health reasons, but he goes out. We're going to go out in the next few weeks into the Frankland River in the Tarkine, where there's a subspecies of this which is blue and white. But the big ones are a browny colour. They grow to 1 metre in length and 6 kilograms in weight, the world's largest freshwater lobsters. Well, guess what? Opening the 400,000 hectares of reserves is going to allow the logging of the headwaters of the rivers where the nurseries are for these lobsters. And when the mud comes down from the logging, even filters through the little screen they leave around it, it cakes the underwater branches, which are in turn coated with all that green, we tend to call it slime, but is living vegetation in the water on which the lobsters feed. So, logging means starvation. Starvation means death. And of course, death means extinction. That hasn't been taken into account by the government, but I went up to Laponia because that's one of their headwater stream in this little forest is one of the 4 best nurseries left in Tasmania, the only place in the world where this Astacopsis gouldi, the great freshwater crayfish, lives and replenishes. And we were there a day after, well, the state government, a bit like the Baird government here in New South Wales, had brought in different laws, but laws to stop peaceful environmental protest. And in doing so, Premier Will Hodgman said, this is not to snare mums and dads, it is to catch extremist radical environmentalists. Now, we have none of those here today, but I'm still looking for some in case we need to catch them. The fact is, the first person arrested under these laws for being in their own local forest was a grandfather, and next was a neurosurgeon nurse from Hobart who'd grown up in the farm next to this forest and ridden her pony as a girl down the trail. And she was arrested and she went in again the next day, was arrested again, and under those laws faces 4 years in jail. I went down a couple of days later with Paul and some others to do a film of what was going on in this forest and got grabbed as well, and I'm a policeman's son. But there you go. Taken off to Burnie Police Station. Now, they dropped the charges against me when I announced that I was now taking action in the High Court because singling out one little group in the community and saying you don't have a right to peaceful protest breaches our constitutional right, as court cases have determined. It's not there in black and white, but it's been determined as inherent to be involved in political discourse. And when I took this action against the government's laws, they dropped the charges against me. I don't know how you get on if you want to pursue political purposes, how you would get on in dropping charges, criminal charges effectively made against somebody. But they did. And when Jessica Hoyt, the young mum who'd been arrested earlier, said she'd join me in that case, they dropped the charges against her too, because they wanted us to withdraw our action against their laws in the High Court. And no doubt the New South Wales government and the Western Australian government also bringing in draconian anti-environmental, peaceful, people's good-hearted stand where you can against the destruction of the planet. And if we can't do it in Australia, where on earth can we do it? Laws. They must feel they're vulnerable. However, they've dropped the charges against us, which is nice. We're proceeding with the case in the High Court, and next week the first hearing will be heard on that. Because of those of us who don't, who will? Here we are in the wealthiest country in dollar terms. We are members of the wealthiest society ever on the face of the planet. But as the American poet said, I wake it's 3:20 and I'm awake. I can't sleep because my great-grandchildren keep coming to me in my dreams and saying to me, what did you do when the climate started changing, the planet started? What did you do when the birds and animals and reptiles and plants were going to extinction? Did you step off the footpath when they robbed us of our democracy? And I'm talking about here the Baird government, the Barnett government, the Hodgman government bringing in these laws to trammel the right of ordinary citizens to peacefully make a stand for what's left of this great country's forests, its woodlands, its coasts, its oceans, its wildlife. And he said, they keep coming to my dreams and saying, what did you do? Now, I asked Premier Baird this, having brought in these laws and then followed up with laws which I understand open millions of hectares of currently intact woodlands and forests in this formative state of New South Wales to destruction. And it's coming, it's happening, it's in the Parliament now. And the question is, Premier Baird, are you with the dinosaurs who sent almost, or went with almost all species to extinction? Or are you with the modern heart and soul of this state, certainly this region and this country, which is not only for protecting what we've got left, but restoring what we've lost? That's the right way to go. It's not the way Premier Baird is going. I know from past premiers, Carr ran, for example, Holgate in Tasmania, when asked after they've left, what's the greatest achievement of their premiership? They all say, oh, I protected that rainforest or set up this national park, friendly beaches in Tasmania. It is the most soul-uplifting thing to be able to use what power we have to protect this planet which gives us everything we have. And if I get near to Premier Baird, I'll be saying, Premier, for your own soul's sake, turn that law around. And if you want to legislate, toughen up the laws, protecting what's left of the wildlife and plant life, including the marine life of New South Wales, so that it can be passed on safely to those who come after us for generations to come, including the generations of our fellow living species in this state, on this continent, around the planet. We are charged with a huge imperative to roll up our sleeves, get out of the armchair, step off the footpath and take action. That's why I'm so delighted to be here in a centre of environmental action endemism, here in the Northern Rivers, where this great restorative movement has not only taken place, but now has forests to show for it, and has much more to come, and that hundreds, thousands of people would turn out to a great event like this, because our hearts and our souls are together in wanting to honour nature rather than to chainsaw or blow up or knock it down, is a tribute to the face of things to come. A great pity Premier Baird wasn't speaking here rather than me. Now, I have one last little thing on the action front, and that's this. Over the border in central Queensland, there's a thing called the Adani coal mine. That is a multi-billionaire from India. Did you know that Beijing's just passed New York for the number of billionaires on the planet? Just thought I'd throw that in. A billionaire from India, very well connected. He knows not only Gina Reinhardt, but Barnaby Joyce. And he's coming with the last week assent of the Palaszczuk government in Queensland, who are fast-tracking it effectively, and seeking government assistance, and they've just bought the Abbott Point terminal inside the Great Barrier Reef, to turn the sod to open up on the world's biggest coal mine. In an age where fossil fuels are rapidly escalating, not just the temperature, but the destructive force of we human beings on the rest of the natural realm of the planet. When that's finished, that mine, as originally proposed, if you stand on, it will be the biggest hole on Earth. If you stand on one side of the crater, you will not be able to see the other side because it's beyond the horizon. And out of that will have come more coal that, well, it will provide 4% of the greenhouse gases from the whole planet by 2050 if it persists. This is a crime against life on this planet. And people say, and I say to myself, what are you going to do about that? Well, if it proceeds, I'm getting a busload of people, and maybe quite a few of them will have a little fleck of gold in their, silver amongst the gold in their hair like me, to come up from Hobart. Self-contained, make sure you have good health, have a plane ticket back, pay for your own lawyers, and we'll sit in on the Adani coal mine. And people say to me, well, we'd like to join your bus. I say, no, bring your own bus. People in Adelaide and Perth and elsewhere. Ladies and gentlemen, we can make the difference. And we must make the difference. And therefore, I want to just finish by saying I'm so delighted to be here with you, with everybody involved with this movement, which is a world leader over the last 3 and more decades, because you have stepped off the footpath, you have got out of the armchair, you are making a positive difference to this planet. My hat off to you all. It's a great pleasure to be a speaker at this great Landcare conference. I wish you great success in the future, and I hope that people power betwixt now and then will turn around this draconian legislation that Mr. Baird's got in pocket. But if it doesn't, it just means we've got a bigger job in front of us as we celebrate life on the planet and are determined, in the words of Allegra Strahanis, the great Tasmanian wilderness photographer, to make sure we leave the planet the more beautiful for having lived on it as we pass it on to all those yet to come. Thanks, ladies and gentlemen.